everyone. I'm Alyse Thompson-Richards, Editor-in-Chief of Food Engineering. In this very special year-end discussion, Bob Garrison, Chief Editor of Prepared Foods, Kelley Rodriguez, Editor-in-Chief of Refrigerated and Frozen Foods, and I combine our unique perspectives to discuss the biggest trends and news stories in 2025, how automation and sustainability are carried out across segments, and what we expect to see in the food industry in 2026. Let's get started. Hello, Bob. Hello, Kelley. Thanks so much for joining me.
Hi.
Thanks for Alyse for having us.
Yeah.
So I want to frame up our conversation a little bit. Obviously, we all cover the food industry, but through very different lenses. Of course, with Bob on prepared foods, your focus is on R&D and product formulation. Kelley, you focus on manufacturing of cold products, but also, of course, the cold chain and the supply and logistics. And then for me, on food engineering, focus on food manufacturing, but specifically plant design and process engineering and automation integration. And so these things are somewhat different, very important, but we realized without all three of them, we wouldn't be able to get the products that we know and love on store shelves. So, in that spirit of combining perspectives, I thought it'd be a great idea if we could all get together and talk about some of the biggest things that we've been seeing in 2025 and what we expect to see in 2026. What do you guys
Yep.
think about that?
Sure. I love it.
Sounds
I love
good.
it.
Let's get
Yeah.
out our crystal balls.
All right, so let's start with the biggest headlines from the food industry this year. Kelley, do you want to start by talking about maybe what was the biggest story in your segment of the food industry?
I would say the biggest, and Bob will probably echo this as well from a product innovation standpoint. I think the biggest headline that was overarching this year was a lot of acronyms, MAHA and GLP-1. And I would say that those two are probably the biggest things because they influenced everything from product development on through the manufacturing process. As we know, every time a formulation changes, that doesn't just require a change to the recipe. It often requires a change to the entire process.
Yep.
So I would point to those two things. And a study came out just this week from Circana that's predicting by 2030, GLP-1 users are going to represent about a third of all F&B consumers. So I think that's another reflection of this year was the year that protein invaded everything. At least in the frozen aisle, the cold and frozen aisle. Protein has invaded everything, from ice cream to on down to, when we want to talk about a shelf stable product, on down to protein popcorn.
I was going to add another acronym. I was going to say UPF for ultra processed foods.
Yes.
It's rare that we get lots of mega headline kind of news in the formulation world, but there was just news as of like yesterday about San Francisco filing a lawsuit against
Right.
a big number of consumer packaged goods companies, basically claiming or charging that these foods are addictive. They're targeted to kids. They're targeted at minority communities. The processors are denying everything, and these products contribute to a public health crisis. There's a lot of lawsuits right now. There's one that unfortunately involves Campbell Soup, involving chicken and the origins of their chicken, and that's kind of being battled right now. As you mentioned, the FDA and with MAHA is doing a lot with artificial colors. I should, yeah.
I was gonna say, I think we're recording this in early December, and I believe tomorrow is the debut of
Yeah.
of so-called colorless the Cheetos and the Doritos, I believe, are debuting
The
this
naked,
week.
yeah.
The naked reformulated dye-less
Yeah.
snack foods.
So and again in our world, it's the Consumer Brands Association is really having to kind of step up, and is doing quite a bit right now with its own six-figure campaign to kind of counteract or just talk about ingredient transparency and kind of the things that the ingredient companies are doing or the processing companies are doing. And then finally, from my perspective, it's been what started with the war in the Ukraine and how that impacted like supplies of sunflower oil.
Mhm.
This 2025 has certainly seen commodity is world weather with weather and drought and how that impacts things like coffee and cocoa.
Right.
So I'll stop talking now.
No, those are all huge things. I'm glad that you brought up the reciprocal tariffs and how they were eventually rolled back for agricultural products because these are things that we cannot produce here. And they're things that people consume every day, like coffee, chocolate. We're heading into the holiday season. Like that's the hugest
Yeah.
season apart from Halloween for the confectionery industry. So I'm glad that there was some recognition that these things are really important. We can't source them here, so we shouldn't take that out on the importers who need those ingredients. And I'm also glad that you brought up the Campbell story because there was a lot of blowback with the bioengineered meat. That's what the exec
Yeah.
allegedly called it. But that really interested me because on food engineering, we cover alternative protein a lot. And
Mhm.
that includes plant-based protein, but also cell
Yeah.
cultivated protein. And I think that's what they were referring to, but clearly there's still a ways to go as far as consumer acceptance because people were very concerned about Campbell's allegedly using
Right.
bioengineered meat, which
Yeah.
they came out and said they specifically do not do that, that they source their chicken from USDA approved farms in the US, so that isn't the case. But to hear that there was such concern about it, that was big to me because there's been a lot of technological advances in the cell cultivation space, and
Yeah.
the folks in that category truly believe that this will alleviate some of the ethical and
Yeah.
environmental issues around
Right.
protein, but there's still a long way to go, even on the technology side and on the scale side. So
Yeah.
to
The
get the
funny thing
amount of
too,
chicken that Campbell's needs for their
right?
soup
Yeah.
from
I
a
said there's
cell
no way.
cultivation, there's no way at this point.
That's
So
right. There's no way that, and there's no way that the irony is the irony, the first thing that came to mind is it would in fact not be, I believe the executive referred to it, derogatorily, and um it certainly would not allow soup to be sold at the price that it is currently sold. In fact, if it did contain lab grown, quote unquote, lab grown meat or cultivated, a type of cultivated protein, it would probably be $30 a can. Because as you said, the scale uh is not there yet, let alone public uh the public perception slash consumer appetite.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the angle that I took the story just because we write about alternative protein every day. I don't
Right.
I don't see what the big deal is, but clearly we have a ways to go.
Alyse, what do you think? What would you say for 2025 in sort of the plant development slash engineering world? What would your biggest story or theme of the year have been?
Honestly, I would say new construction. There have like every month there's probably half a dozen news stories about either groundbreakings or plant openings or what have you of new construction going on in the food industry. And some of these are really big plants. Like in April, Chobani announced that they were going to spend $1.2 billion
Million
on a
dollars.
plant
Yeah.
in New York. And Walmart is in an interesting story. Walmart is has opened its own beef packing plant. It's open to milk processing
Yeah.
plants. So that in itself is interesting that a retailer is really taking charge of the supply chain and the processing and handling in that sense. And then there's been a lot in the snack space, a lot in dairy. It's crazy to me, especially within this economic environment. It's definitely tough to get capital. But I mean, these are projects that have probably been 2 or 3 years in the making, and they're just coming to fruition now. But it's encouraging for sure that we are seeing so much construction. And Bob, you mentioned Maha, you mentioned colors, and Kelly brought up too, protein in everything. Are you seeing that a lot?
Yes. I mean, I think immediately of Quest, which has been doing protein. My wife just bought protein. She's ordering them because we can't find them here. She's ordering protein snack chips. Um, and then they're doing donuts and everything. It's hard to imagine. And then meanwhile, the protein levels are just going up and up and up and up, like 20 grams to 30 grams. Um, and even though consumers may not have any clue about how much daily protein they need, there's seemingly no stopping of it. With our predictions for 2026, fiber is the next. I mean, that's what we're hearing a lot more about and that certainly kind of fits the GLP-1 and the overall trend really of satiety that fiber can
Well,
really contribute to.
and
To that.
and I think too, Bob, to your point with the I was speaking to a nutritionist at a conference recently, and I think the fiber is also another response to we're packing everything with protein.
Yeah.
And protein is a vital nutrient, but it's not the only nutrient that your body, needs.
Right.
Because I feel like fiber had a big day a few years back. Fiber was really popular, and then it's no longer. Now protein is the belle of the ball.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny how
Yeah.
we seem to be very sort of cyclical. I guess kind of just like all the '90s fashion is back. So too are some of the
Well, there's broader discussion now about the gut brain axis, and related to digestive health and just
right.
your microbiome overall, and fiber kind of plays into that. The only other thing I would note about GLP-1, and I imagine that this in some of the food service writing we've seen, they're talking about with consumers eating smaller portions, or at least those consumers on this diet, they really need to maximize nutrition in those smaller portions, and that overall nutrient density will need to be greater for those kind of products.
I wonder if there will be any change in that with maybe the side effects that some people are
Right.
experiencing from these
Yeah. This is still
medications. Like it seems like, a magic bullet, especially for folks who have weight management concerns. But, what's the trade-off? So I wonder if that will ever stem the tide at all over
this
the
is
next allegedly decade.
yeah, this is still early
Mhm.
time,
Right.
I would say.
And so, Kelly, we've seen a lot of explosion within the cold space, a lot of partnerships, a lot of opening of distribution centers. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I would say just, you mentioned plant openings. I would echo that. I think in the cold space, there's been a lot of plant openings and or not only greenfield projects, a lot of expansions. And maybe adding on of a line, expanding the building to account for automation. We've also seen, again, it's been a busy year for cold storage development, not necessarily the heights that it was at in maybe 2022, 23, but there has been, we're continuing, as you said, every month, it seems there's a handful of announcements of either groundbreakings, expansions, openings. One thing that's interesting is you have seen on the cold storage facility front, you have seen recently, just here in the third and fourth quarters, announcements by some of the two major players in the industry, Lineage and Americold, have both stepped up import export services. And so that also, they both cited the tariffs as one of the reasons that they are trying to look at things in a more global view, let's say, and provide more services for their customers. The other thing that the cold foods industry, refrigerated and frozen processors and manufacturers in the last several years is, again, there's been a significant amount of merger and acquisition activity. Particularly at least just this week, Horizon Organic, announced that they're going to acquire Maple Hill. So there has been a lot of acquisition of maybe smaller challenger brands in the market by larger CPGs. I last year, I believe I said it, and I'll say it again this year. I still think that's a big source of innovation. And I don't know if Bob, if you would agree with that, but particularly in the frozen space, it seems that there's a lot of, let's say maybe cuisines that were once niche or foods that were once niche. Let's take dumplings, for example.
Yeah.
And now everybody,
Yeah.
everybody has a dumpling on the a frozen dumpling, it seems like, on the market.
Yeah. If I can, one thing that I would add, we've certainly seen from a spending perspective that more of the consumer's dollar has gone over to retail from food service. That
Yes.
as they are more anxious about their food spending. And it's not to say that people have stopped being indulgent, because they certainly are, but a lot more of the consumer's food dollar now, more than ever for a while, has gone over to retail. It's gone over to private label,
Right.
and it's gone to refrigerated and frozen convenience things. As you know, if they can't go out to eat, people are wanting things that are, further prepared. And they're looking for global adventure. They're looking for all the things that they would want in a restaurant, but looking at it from the freezer case. And frozen foods are enjoying a good time. And another thing that we've been reading or hearing about is that there's a move for nostalgia. And people like retreating to grandma hobbies. This is the first time I ever thought I would say grandma hobbies.
Yeah.
But really retreating to comfort foods and looking to like some of the basics, and frozen kind of fits that, and pantry foods.
Well, okay, so I got to tell you, this kind of also checks another, I hate to use the word trend, but another sort of pattern in my category, which you talk about nostalgia. And I was at NFRA in the fall, the National Frozen and Refrigerated Foods Association, and one of the cool things that they do is the Taste of Excellence. And a lot of it's everybody, it's emerging brands, it's major CPGs, it's everybody in the middle. And you get to walk around and sample some of the latest and greatest. Well, probably one of the most popular, if not the most popular table, there was a line to try those Stranger Things strawberry waffles. And and again, let's like you talk about nostalgia, and then also the impact of influencer culture, because I don't know if you have noticed the number of Stranger Things branded foods that came out this fall in conjunction with the 5th and final season was just absolutely wild to me. I think there was like 5 different CPGs that did. But I got to tell you, those Eggo Stranger Things waffles were a hit at the show, and I'm sure they were a hit with consumers.
Yeah.
Because as you said, I think they checked a lot of boxes for a lot of people who are also probably my age, who are kind of in the midst of, some of us we're raising kids, and and some of us are also caring for parents, and that also ties back into the convenience aspect as well. But
what Nestle in its own predictions for 2026, one of the things that Nestle talked about, and maybe you saw this, was they, of their trends, they talked about weird is wonderful.
right.
And they talked about, even for their own lines, and they, frozen is what they're huge in frozen. One of the things that they talked about was, consumers really going for things that are kind of really out there. And their own examples included like a Tombstone French fry crust pizza.
And I ate that too.
Yeah, and a DiGiorno Thanksgiving pizza. Yeah. And they did like Wolverine and all those kind of things.
Yeah.
So the weird is wonderful is kind of a fun trend.
Well, and you look at like a company like Grillo's Pickles. Again, they're opening a factory, I believe, in Indiana. They're in the midst of opening a new production facility. But one of the things that they have really hung their hat on is using pickles for more than just pickles. They have a whole line of like pickle salsas now, pickle-based picos. So you are right. I think, the younger generations were definitely more adventurous eaters. And the RTE categories, the convenience categories in fresh and frozen are really, really meeting those needs, I think.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
there's the social media component, right? Like if you make something, produce something, put something out there that goes viral on TikTok,
Right.
then you're sold out,
Yeah.
right?
A
So,
great example from this year was cottage cheese.
oh yes.
You know, I had a processor tell me, you know, I've had retailers, they could not keep cottage cheese on their shelves in a lot of parts of the country because, again, and it was purely due to TikTok,
Yeah, because
which is
there's a
fascinating to me.
proliferation of recipes where you use cottage cheese to make your tortilla, you use cottage
Right.
cheese to make your cheesecake, you use cottage cheese to make whatever. And so, I mean, that plays into this like nutrient dense protein and everything trend as well. But once something gets going, it's on social media, it's hard to stop it.
I mean, I think, Bob, I have to ask you because you used to work on refrigerated and frozen foods, and you've been with prepared foods for a long time. And I mean, to me, the number of food brands partnering um, with quote unquote influencers, as I said, with people that I may have never
Yeah.
heard of.
Um,
uh, I had no idea cottage cheese was going viral on TikTok
yeah.
until I heard about it from an industry contact. And there's sometimes I feel like there's a whole nother world. But did you ever? I feel like you have been here the longest. Did you ever in your lifetime feel that, or do you remember a time when there was as much?
Oh, no, no, no. No, no, not ever. I mean, within the last 5 years, I would say, or maybe not even that long. I mean, whether it's chips, I mean, there are families, there are people, there are LA celebrities that are doing their own lines of chips or beverages, or um, there was Nestle just on their Nestle food service side. They're partnering with
Sophia,
yeah,
Vergara,
Vergara
yeah.
and her son for empanadas.
And Paris Hilton just today
Oh,
announced
right, yeah,
a line of
International Delight.
coffee
Yeah,
creamers with
yeah,
International Delight. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
and I just have to chuckle because it really, it's very it's wild to me. It's kind of the wild west of
yeah,
brand endorsement deals right now. And it used to be that, to endorse kind of a food product, you kind of, I think, had to believe
yeah,
that the person was gonna, eat that food, or it was sort of, if I think of like the milk mustache campaign of the 90s. And now it's not that way. It's not a celebrity chef. It's just, hey, this is
yeah,
my celebrity version of XYZ. Or when Oreos came out
yeah.
this last year with the LTOs.
Well, now you have, I mean, now you have full-blown lines related to shows. I mean,
Right.
Oreo, speaking of Oreo, I mean, they came out with a Game of Thrones Oreo. And then I'm thinking about Yellowstone. The popularity of Yellowstone came out
Yes.
with, became an entire Yellowstone brand of products. Alyse, this kind of fits. I see this kind of circling back around to you. I mean, we were just writing about coverage of the Private Label Manufacturers Association, and one of our writers was commenting that perhaps more than ever before, whether you're talking about supermarket private label or whether you're a processor looking for a co-manufacturer, you can find these people that can really do, from a manufacturing standpoint, really, respond quickly and really come up with some, private label used to be a lot slower
Right.
and
A speed to market time.
yeah, and to get to market and wasn't on par with quality or price, or we're not price but quality or anything. And now it's pretty much on trend, on time. And that's it goes back to the manufacturing side with all the co-manufacturers, which is kind of a hard world to track and cover, but there's a lot of activity there.
It is. I mean, there's a lot of development, even by co-manufacturers, as far as opening plants.
Mm.
We covered one just last week or 2 weeks ago. Proper Beverage Co. in Michigan is opening a 300,000 square foot beverage
Yeah,
manufacturing plant just to serve startups, to serve,
yeah,
beverage brands across the country.
Yep.
I don't know if they have their own branded product. I'm assuming no, but I mean, obviously that manufacturing need is there,
Yeah.
and they have flexibility. They
I
it's built into the model to be able to produce,
yeah.
anything,
I
whereas someone who has a branded product maybe has more guardrails as far as what they can do.
I think what's the CRB Horizons, they CRB came out with a report this fall, and one of the interesting nuggets of information was in there. They asked CPG companies about their manufacturing utilization, basically, and and how much of them were going to go outside over the next 3 years to co-packers or co-manufacturers. And I believe it was a third. It was over a third, I believe. Somewhere around 30% said at least some of our product will be manufactured by a private label co-man manufacturer. And at the Food Automation and Manufacturing Symposium this year, we had the CEO of Stampede Meats, Brock Furlong, and I got to tour their facility in New Mexico this year, and they are proudly agnostic. I think in his opening remarks, he said, "We do not have a brand. We really never have. We don't have a price sheet. We don't even have a list of products really that we can manufacture." And that's fascinating to me because they are an example of, like, if you build it, they will come. Because they have continued to expand manufacturing facilities strictly to meet that private label need for both retail and food service.
I mean, A, the demand is there, but B, it helps some brand owners not have to pursue the capital to expand manufacturing. They can find someone else to do it, which this asset light model, I'm sure that is desirable for some brand owners out there.
Alyse, can you speak to for all the big new facilities and for all this activity that we're talking about, are there workers to fill all those jobs? And can you talk a little bit about automation and the balance between workforce availability or workforce capacity and automation?
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. Speaking of important news and trends this year, automation, of course, is a big one, and that's goes across all of our segments. But as far as labor goes, I mean, manufacturers are still struggling to get a pool of workers who are willing to do manufactured labor, which can be tiring, which can be, intense. It could be really hot or really cold, and so they're still struggling to get the workforce, even though, especially with these new plants, they're bringing hundreds of new jobs to these regions, but it's still hard to fill that gap. So manufacturers are turning to automation to maybe reduce the number of folks they need on site, or to make the jobs they have available higher skill so they
Yeah.
can pay them more, train them more, and make them even more valuable to the organization. So that's a long answer to your question, but yes, there still are labor concerns, and manufacturers are turning on to automation to address them.
Yeah.
I think the interesting thing from my perspective in refrigerated and frozen is automation seemingly, still the packaging line is where a lot of manufacturers and processors start. But what's interesting is even in the course of covering the industry for 4 years, I've seen the automation creep further and further up the line earlier on in the process.
Yeah.
And I think that's directly, it's tied to a lot of things. It's tied to labor. It's certainly tied to food safety in the cold chain. A lot of the automation, I think, is being deployed to achieve a food safety and a throughput goal. And and quite frankly, it's really fascinating to tour some of these, particularly frozen and cold storage like facilities. Um, you understand it once you're in there, in your refrigerator coat and your
Refrigerator.
boots and your, you kind of get it, and it's like, yeah, if we could take humans out of this environment,
Yeah.
or to your point, Alyse, sometimes you go into cook rooms, they're incredibly uncomfortable and humid and steamy and hot. I think if you can, remove the human from those elements, but as and certainly like this kind of touches on Bob's world, there's a lot of foods and a lot of processes that are just still not able to be automated. There's just, if you're making things like mashed potatoes, I'll take our RNFS processor of the year, Reese's. A lot of their facility that I got to tour this fall did certainly feature some automated parts to it, but there were surprisingly things that were not automated. And their reason was, look, we're dealing with potatoes, and these are not a uniform, perfect, you're trying to fit a round hole in a square peg sort of thing.
And I'm sure as technology improves, the automation will continue to move further and further up the line. But, you know, they said this in the confectionery industry, particularly with chocolate, but I think it applies to the whole food industry, is that it's a science and an art. Like there's a reason why factories rely on the people who have been there for 40 years, who know exactly where to tap the machine to get it to work because, there is an art to it in addition to all the science and technology that go into it. But speaking of automation, I also wanted to ask you guys about AI. I feel like we really, really heard a lot about AI this year. So we're definitely seeing it in food manufacturing as a whole as far as using AI, but I'd love to hear more about how they're using it in product development. Bob, can you speak to that a little
Sure.
bit?
We actually had a new products conference back in Minneapolis, maybe 2019. And that was one of the very first times that I was hearing about it. And this is when Unilever was on the cutting edge of using some of the early versions of AI to just research, to do extensive data searches for what people were talking about, in social media and in relationship to ice cream. And interestingly enough, people talked about having ice cream for breakfast. And then it wasn't long after that that Ben and Jerry's came out with a breakfast cereal ice cream.
Right.
And then, so more recently, one of our writers for our predictions was talking about using AI, and they talked about a company in Japan using AI to come up with some new flavors, I think for beverages. And they thought that the executives there thought that they had kind of a sense of what the flavors were going to be. And then they ran it through, I think, a third party's AI service, which came out with pine as a flavor. And it is kind of a trending flavor right now, interestingly enough, that pine is a flavor. And so that's what they ended up going with. So what I was traditionally used to of just thinking about using AI for the consumer insights kind of stuff has now really become robust in terms of AI. And now companies, product developers, and marketers can use AI to write product descriptions. They can identify, they can drill down more into their consumer targets and consumer values. They can analyze it. They can use it more to analyze market opportunities than before, and even their competitors and what their competitors are doing. We have some. There's a company called Notco, and they
I
were
was
talking
just
about
gonna
using.
say, yeah.
Yeah, they're very active with a
Giuseppe,
number
I
of.
believe. They have
Yeah,
a name
yeah,
for
just
their
sent
AI.
me.
Just
Yeah,
saying.
and they were talking about using it even to come up with, asking the program to come up with suggested ingredients and even come up with suggested vendors. So again, from what to me started with just fun flavor research as a consumer insights has really become three dimensional at the very least.
I'm excited to see how that continues to play out. And especially in the plant world,
Yeah,
we're using AI a lot to for vision, being able to pre-program certain parameters and use cameras to reject product down the line based on potential defects. Preventative maintenance is a huge thing, like looking at machine data and noticing patterns to predict
yeah,
when a
right.
breakdown might occur, which is a big deal if you can avoid some unplanned downtime. But what I really want to talk about, and we have a story coming out about this month, is agentic AI, where it goes beyond, you know, collecting large amounts of data, looking at patterns, and making recommendations based on that. It's then making decisions and taking actions without human intervention. And that's pretty scary, especially when you think about it in terms of a plant context. But, I'm curious to see what that will look like, next year. I don't know if you guys have been hearing about that at all in your space or if there are any other applications for AI that you've been hearing about.
I think in the cold chain, it's going to obviously go to, as you said, a lot of the using AI and Industry 4.0 tools and all of these things for, processing line improvements. Preventative maintenance is another one. Um, you know, not only preventative maintenance, but actually, having people having sort of someone that is using AI to actually repair a machine, using AI as sort of a stand-in for a teacher or a guide. And the other thing is obviously with cold storage and distribution, you're continuing to see a lot of companies implement technologies, AI technology to, as you said, like parse the data. There's a lot now, particularly with food safety and things like FSMA traceability and every move that a cold product makes has to be tracked and logged, and you can drown in data. So I think that's where a lot of the cutting edge companies are using it. Now, there's a survey that came out this year that said a majority of food and beverage companies are still relying on paper spreadsheets and sort of outdated technology. So I think that's where you're going to continue to see that money being spent in my world in the cold chain is on not having death by data and really being able to in the event of a recall, which no one ever wants to say those words, but being able to quickly identify that product, or if it's a traceability with, trace the ingredient back to that supplier, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's where, from a just an overall benefit to the public, that's probably where one of the greatest uses of AI will come in and hopefully be able to speed some of these recalls and reformulations up.
When you mentioned death by data, it makes me think of kind of the rise of data analytics using AI to identify patterns and be able to create more dashboards for people, for executives to be able to
Right.
see more dashboards, to be able to make more informed decisions. That I'm such a visual person that I would love that.
So another overarching theme across all segments of food industry is sustainability. And I would love to hear from you guys how you're seeing it in your segment of the industry. Do you want to start, Bob?
Sure. We certainly see it across three, at least two big areas. One is primarily ingredients, and the other one is packaging. To me, the most direct thing in our world that has a direct impact is upcycling, ingredient upcycling, where they're using a byproduct of other waste stream byproduct, and then they can turn that and recapture it and use it as an ingredient, and that in the broader world, like the like using like a brewer's spent grains as a source of protein, kind of kick things off. So we continue to see that group, the Upcycled Food Association, now become global and has a certification program as well with where food comes from as their certifying body, or which now owns the rights to that certification. I have been it's been interesting to explore the New York University Stern Center for Sustainable Business tracks. They do a lot of consumer insights research and about whether consumers are actually taking action and whether they're willing to buy and whether they're looking for those kind of sustainable symbols and hints on a package, and if that motivates them to buy. It does seem like it's working, but it seems like it's very slow, and maybe particularly given this economy, it's a nice to have more than a need to have. I'm such an upcycling champion that it's going too slow for me. Regenerative agriculture is something that we want to write about. It's something that big companies like Nestle or General Mills are talking about in terms of where they're getting the wheat for their, all of their everything from pizza crust to, flour for everything else, and the types of agreements that they're striking up with their suppliers. Some of the hardcore advocates for regenerative agriculture don't think that that the activities have gone near far enough in that world, and so I'm hoping that comes along. Packaging is packaging is tricky. Again, this is yet another area where I wish there was a lot more activity. But we love packaging as part of the product development process, and I love to write about sustainable packaging every time I can. And then lastly, I'll say that sustainability can even go down. I mean, we certainly write about small companies, startups, and emerging companies, and you can see them. Their impact in this is just buying local. Their ingredients aren't traveling long distances to get to where they are. But anyway, I kind of look at it from all those perspectives.
So from a plant
Yeah.
perspective, it's a lot about, you know, um, using resources intelligently. And that includes energy. I've seen a lot of manufacturers turn toward solar or wind power. I mean, even Mars, I think within the last few months, signed a big solar power purchase agreement showing that some of the energy that they're using is sustainable. To how we're treating water and reusing it, how we're treating wastewater and
Mhm.
using that effectively, and then of course energy efficiency. That's a huge one. I have seen some talk about electrifying um, processing equipment versus using gas. Granted, that's, capital intensive up front, so it's probably a slower thing to happen, especially here. I think it's happening more in Europe, but that's something else to consider instead of using gas equipment. And then we've also seen a little bit, like Bob mentioned, about carbon recapture, as far as like, especially from like a brewing process,
Yep.
recapturing that carbon and being able to use it again for yourself or being able to sell it to somebody else for them to use it. So those are just a few of the things that, I've been seeing this year. What about
I
you,
think
Kelly?
in the cold chain, yeah, there's been a couple of major pork and poultry processors that announced various like renewable natural gas projects, methane capture. Regenerative agriculture is also very big in the dairy industry as well. Um, And then certainly with the cold chain, it's always about that temperature control. And certainly, natural resources, electricity, energy is usually the second biggest cost for a processor or a cold storage, 3PL logistics provider, behind labor. So anything that they can do to lower their footprint, or as you said, generate something on site, buy something that's renewable, certainly that's definitely in the works. And then you are starting to see some, DHL just announced today that they took delivery of another electrified tractor trailer, and it's running in California, and it's successfully hauling, um, a 53-foot trailer of goods. So you're continuing to see, as you said, different parts being electrified, different parts of the plant. And then always in refrigerated and frozen processing, there's always the discussion of what type of refrigeration you're using, how that impacts, as you said, not only like the design of the plant and the facility, but how it impacts your long-term energy costs, potential savings, et cetera, et cetera.
So, oh, go ahead, Bob.
No, Alyse, Kelley had mentioned Reezers, and I love that company as her processor of the year. Who can you? I don't know. I was curious about who your processor of the year perhaps was this year, and maybe what stood out about whoever that company was.
Yes, so our plant of the year was Carolina Foods' Pineville plant in North Carolina. They make honey buns, they make mini donuts,
Ah,
and this plant, it to be honest, it was pretty incredible. Everything, it's a greenfield, so everything was brand new. They were able to design everything from scratch to specification how they wanted it. Um, what was really interesting about Carolina Foods design is that it was completely linear because in their legacy plant, they kind of fit their
yeah,
lines in how they could,
yeah.
but this time they're like, no, we want everything linear. So from ingredient receiving all the way to finished product out the door, it's a straight line. And that has to increase your efficiency so much. So, and the
Mhm.
plant is huge. It's like over 400,000 square feet. So it was just even a lot to walk through just to visit it. So, I mean, that in itself was pretty cool. But of course, a lot of automation, not only in packaging, but in ingredient dosing and in mixing and even the processing side of things. So that was really interesting as well. And, they have their own wastewater treatment plant on site. They have their own ingredient or like sugar mills, so they can make powdered sugar themselves. They don't have to, get powdered sugar brought
And I
in.
was going to
So
say, and Alyse, are they the plant that also partnered with a mill, a nearby mill
no,
to
that was
co-locate?
Campbell's Goldfish Mill, which that
Okay,
was
that's,
really,
yes.
or Goldfish Plant, that was really interesting in
Yeah.
Utah because I went to see them over the summer, and that was pretty cool because they need a lot of wheat, and the plant is based in Utah, and northern Utah, and I guess southern Idaho as well are they grow a lot of wheat, so they partnered with a mill to build one adjacent to the factory, so that way
Right.
it's the freshest that it could possibly be, and it reduces carbon emissions because they don't have to truck a bunch of wheat in every day. So
Right. I was gonna say it's another, like, it's a sustainable, but it's also a hedge against, your supply chain.
it's a
Uh
quality
it's new,
improvement, it's
right. It's a
sustainability
quality
improvement,
control.
and
Yeah.
it's, just one more way to link them to the community. So that
On,
was
on
really
a,
cool to see.
on a small level, I was thinking about I'm kind of thinking about Tillamook in building an ice cream plant in Illinois,
Yes.
and instead of Tillamook's way out west, and instead of shipping all that ice cream, now they're going to be they're cutting the country in two, kind of.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, again, yeah, they renovated a very old legacy plant. It was a former ice cream facility, but it had been defunct for some time. And they located there because, in part, because of the milk shed that was nearby.
Yeah.
So, but then again, also that last mile delivery.
Yeah, right.
to get to all of us East Coast customers.
So thinking about sustainability, thinking about automation, thinking about AI, what do you guys expect to see next year now that 2025 is rapidly coming to a close?
We had a Spirit of Innovation Awards ceremony, and we had the Sally Lyons Wyatt as our speaker, and talking about innovation, and she certainly made a case for innovation for companies not taking their foot off the accelerator to continue to innovate and drive categories. I'm certainly hoping that that's true. My list of trends overall is about 10 items, at least 10 items long, and I don't expect any of those to change very quickly. It'll be fascinating to see what continues to happen with GLP-1 and how that continues to affect things. But I guess on some level, I'm at the end of the day, I guess as also as a consumer, I'm hoping that the US and global economies, and with all that's kind of swirling around us news wise, it would be nice to have kind of a break in some of that so that consumers just feel better about life and about, and it's not like, they're always going to eat and they're always going to use, different products to escape and indulge and all that. But it'll be interesting. I hope for just on some level that the economy and that for consumer confidence improves.
Yeah, I think it'll be, I think next year is going to be interesting because I think you're going to see a lot of these reformula, again, the MAHA, the impacts from the removal of dyes, the impacts from, as Bob mentioned, some of these, the discussion and now the lawsuits around the term ultra processed foods.
Yeah.
So I think it will be interesting to see how consumers respond as all as these quote unquote the naked snacks and everything are just about to hit store shelves. It will be interesting to see how the consumer responds, and then again you'll have that social media bubble, that sphere of influencers and whatnot. The other thing is touching on packaging and sustainability is more states are coming online with their EPR laws, and that's going to, Bob, to your point, I think that might push us further faster from a packaging standpoint. But it certainly is going to be a lot of challenges for the processors and manufacturers. Again, particularly in my world, a lot of cold foods is packaged in plastic. So that's going to continue to be a driver of I think innovation on the packaging side, but also probably some changes in the formulation and the branding. And then of course, the other interesting thing is, a few years ago we were in the midst of COVID and everyone was buying everything in bulk, and now we are seeing the opposite of that. And this is one thing that Sally has also spoken about when I've interviewed her is the diversity in your packaging sizes. We're seeing people are eating smaller portions. There are smaller households now, things of that nature. So we don't necessarily need the 10-pack, bulk packaging or, again, it goes back to like the indulgences. We don't need to maybe buy the 3-gallon tub of ice cream anymore. So I think that'll be interesting to see how the CPGs respond to sort of changing consumer preferences for the sizes and the serving sizes in which food is packaged.
Yeah.
And then of course convenience stores. I would be remiss to not say the sort of the new frontier of the rise of convenience stores as sort of that another third place, or a place where you can get maybe healthier food now, fresher food. It's not just the Slurpees and the Funyuns anymore. So
I just wrote about 7-Eleven introducing Japanese egg
egg
sandwiches.
salad,
It's like
right?
super cool.
I mean, Yeah. It's fascinating to me. And like Ajinomoto, the big
Yeah.
multinational frozen, they hired a guy specifically. They hired a president of convenience of C-suite
Just
or
yeah,
C
just
stores
to
just
give it comes.
to target basically that burgeoning category for like fresh and frozen.
Yeah.
So
So Alyse, what do you see coming?
From a plant perspective, I think we're going to see even more automation adoption. I think we're going to see even more optimization with or without AI. And then hopefully we'll see more plant construction. I think we will. As manufacturers in general continue to invest in their capabilities in the US. Of course, a lot of what we eat is made here, but I think we're going to continue to see investment there. And yeah, I just hope we just keep moving on, keep moving forward. And I want to thank you both for taking some time to share your insights and your expertise. I really appreciate it.
thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. This has been fun. This has been a lot of fun. Yeah.